Our protagonist transmigrated from the modern world to the Middle Ages, finding himself in the body of an outcast noble, just like in novels. Unfortunately, he had no magic powers or a system. Instead, he used his knowledge of modern science to gain immense physical strength, but he faced one simple problem. Every weapon shatters in his hands. How will our hero achieve his dream in this world, and will he be able to control his overwhelming power? That is what we will find out in our story. The story begins in a harsh world where the blood of the weak is spilled for the strong to drink, and where savage nature imposes its strict laws upon everyone. Amidst this hostile environment, Johann was lurking for his prey in the thicket, while his companion whispered to him about the necessity of remaining calm and remembering the lessons he had learned, pointing to unsuspecting game grazing nearby. When the decisive moment arrived and the order to loose the arrow was given, the shot went wide and made a sound that startled the animal, causing it to flee, which sparked the frustration of the instructor, who screamed his name in despair mixed with anger. The man scolded his student severely for failing to catch the prey and breaking the bow instead, while he tried to salvage the situation with a nervous laugh, claiming the bow broke too easily, perhaps due to its age. However, this excuse did not find acceptance with the instructor, who fumed with anger and regret, asserting that he had bought this bow, which he named Angela, new only a week ago. The instructor surrendered to despair, noting that he had known from the first moment that the young man's desire to learn hunting was without a real goal, wondering about the motive that makes someone of the nobility insist on taking up hunting, and suggesting he learn swordsmanship as a more suitable alternative for his social status. Johann replied realistically that skill in swordsmanship does not yield money until its wielder is hired, then suddenly cut his speech short to suggest moving to another location in search of money, which he sees as the only means of survival in this world he described as corrupt. The truth is that this young man is Johann Eitz, originally named Kim Johann, and he reincarnated in this world after his death in a sudden accident. Despite being a noble, his situation was thorny. He sits at the bottom of his family's hierarchy, with no hope of inheriting a name or wealth. Rather, his utmost ambition is to survive without being stripped of his clothes and expelled during his siblings' struggles for power. But the bigger problem was lurking for them at that moment, as his companion stopped him suddenly with features clad in anxiety, pointing in panic to a pack of wild wolves devouring corpses in the darkness. Suddenly, Johann shoots an arrow at the wolves, but the problem is that the arrow didn't hit any of them, but rather made those wolves notice their location. In a scene reflecting the cruelty of reality, he realized that this world he reincarnated into is characterized by the realism of the Middle Ages, with all its details, and excessive brutality where the dead find no rest even after their perishing. While he wondered if those bodies belonged to people from their village amidst a state of uncertainty, his companion tells him something that cements a single conviction in him that accepts no doubt, that the weak in this world are nothing but prey for the strong. Johann tightened his handstrap firmly, determined not to be prey in this era, and certain of his desperate need for money. At the beginning of his arrival, he wished to possess superpowers or a status window like the heroes of stories, but when he realized this world was devoid of such fantasies, he shifted his goal entirely toward gathering wealth. Money is his key to leaving this province and doing whatever pleases him, whether becoming a merchant or a free farmer. So he decided with obvious eagerness to collect every coin his hand falls upon, whatever the cost. While his eyes shone with a passion for money, his companion called him to show him a plant he found, explaining that it was Little Devil's Grass, a rare herb excellent for stopping bleeding and increasing alertness. While the hunter was boasting of his vast knowledge of herbs, he interrupted him with a single question betraying his material priorities, saying it must be expensive. Johann picked up the plant happily and placed it in his quiver just as he would money. The companion noticed something on the ground, so he picked it up and asked him if this bundle of herbs belongs to him. He denied ownership of it, which sparked the companion's astonishment, who asserted that no one dares to venture this deep into the forest except them. Concluding in shock that someone else was here, their confusion was cut short by a terrifying scream piercing the silence of the forest, freezing the companion in place from the severity of the shock. The two rushed toward the source of the sound to find a horrifying scene, where a child was screaming for help while clinging to a tree branch, surrounded by a pack of starving wolves from every side. The terrified girl's screams rose, asking for rescue from this deadly predicament. The companion Joseph recognized the girl, explaining that she was Dale, daughter of Robert, and wondered in amazement why a child was in this dangerous place. Faced with the large number of wolves, terror took hold of him, so he suggested to his master that they retreat immediately and call for support due to their inability to face this number on their own. But Johann did not listen to the warning and dashed quickly toward the danger, which shocked his companion. Joseph tried to stop him, warning that these were not ordinary wolves but man-eating monsters, but he reassured him and ordered him to save Dale while he took charge of distracting the pack. The companion was stunned by this behavior, unable to believe that a noble would sacrifice himself as bait to save a girl from the common people, but the truth was quite different, as he was blaming himself for not learning to hunt faster, having discovered that this place was nothing but a gold mine. Johann began counting the wolves, whose number exceeded 10, and instead of fear, he was calculating the massive profits he would reap from selling their fur. He prepared for the confrontation with enthusiasm, calling out to his moneymakers, causing Joseph to look at him in amazement, not understanding what was going on. The young man moved with incredible agility, but he held the sword in a strange way. The wolves rushed toward him quickly like a pack. He was surprised by the speed of the wolf's movement and used his sword to block its attack. The wolf used its powerful bite and broke the sword with total ease, causing Johann shock. While he was distracted, another wolf approached and directed a fatal bite toward his neck, and Joseph screamed his master's name, unable to believe what happened. Meanwhile, within the borders of Eitz territory in the village of Baltradan, the Eitz family inspection procession was moving among the miserable villagers who bowed in fear. Madame Eitz expressed her severe disgust at the foul smell while covering her nose. She was followed by the eldest son, Philip Eitz, mounting his steed, led by the territory's ruler, Gessen Eitz, who cursed this miserable countryside and its usual foul smell. Philip approached his father apologetically, informing him that Johann was nowhere to be found, expressing his disapproval of his audacity to be absent from the inspection procession, then maliciously offered to send soldiers to search for that brat. The ruler ordered his eldest son in a harsh tone to forget about him and stop looking for that fool, adding with clear indifference as he swayed from drunkenness that his death somewhere, like his miserable mother, meant nothing to him. As the procession was about to enter the village, a large pile of hay stacked at the entrance stopped the ruler, so he asked with disapproval about the reason for its existence. The villagers rushed to apologize and explain that they placed the hay to cover the traces of Johann's training, which looked ugly to the sight, provoking the mockery of the ruler who scoffed at the idea of a pathetic insect like him training. But that mockery vanished suddenly and was replaced by shock that tied the ruler's tongue when he saw behind the hay pile a deep indentation in the trees resulting from crushing punches, making him wonder in amazement at what he was seeing. Meanwhile, inside the forest, the scene returns to Johann, where he managed to block the wolf's bite with his hand before it hit his neck, and the wolf was surprised that it could not penetrate his skin, just as he managed to break its sword. He realized that fighting with a sword did not suit his style, so he threw his weapon and knocked one of the wolves aside. Deciding to fight in his own way and facing the wolf pack, which he named Moneymakers, with his bare fists, Johann fully believed in the principle of survival of the fittest, and that money was his only way to avoid being prey. To acquire this money, he needed one thing: overwhelming power, enabling him to surpass human limits. Joseph is shocked when he sees him eliminate a wolf with a single punch, pouncing on them fiercely and eliminating them one by one. He crushed the last wolf with a resounding blow that turned it into a lifeless corpse, in a scene that made his companion tremble in disbelief at such mighty power, while he turned coldly asking about the monetary value of this bounty. This power didn't come from nowhere. Johann had realized since childhood that life in this world was not easy, having suffered from the bullying of his brothers who outranked him in the family hierarchy and who did not hesitate to beat him and call him the illegitimate son who has no mother. With the continued threats and beatings, he understood the cruelty of this world and became certain that even if he were beaten to death, no one would care about him, and that the only person he could rely on was himself. He wondered what he needed to survive in a world of the Middle Ages, and luckily he possessed an advantage over the people of this era: his modern knowledge acquired in his previous life as a student, where his mind was teeming with information unimaginable to the inhabitants of this world. He decided to utilize sports science and high-intensity training to build his physique, and despite the astonishment of those around him at his consumption of foods they considered leftovers like oats and cabbage, he saw them as superfoods ideal for building a balanced diet that gives him the strength he sought. He set a strict training regimen based on modern sports science combined with practical close-quarters combat arts, and thus the results of his continuous training accumulated. After several years of persisting with the same training regimen, his body showed overwhelming power that increased with every training session, as he began to feel refreshed and energetic instead of exhaustion. Over time, the question remained hanging whether this power was a divine blessing or just a new test. Returning to the battlefield, Johann stood wiping his sweat, saying these were the last of the wolves. Meanwhile, the companion Joseph checked on the child Dale and confirmed her safety, so she threw herself crying into his lap, calling for Uncle Joseph. The companion scolded his master severely, describing him as reckless for not realizing the danger of what he had done. But he soon expressed his deep emotion at a noble standing before a wild beast without hesitation to save a common girl, offering his deep thanks on behalf of the villagers. While Joseph was speaking seriously, Johann was in his own world calculating his profits, wondering which wolves would sell for the highest price, causing his companion to ask him in amazement what he was saying, to which he replied briefly that it was nothing. He turned to Dale and asked about her condition, and she confirmed gratefully that she was fine thanks to him. Suddenly, the girl shuddered in terror, as a terrifying red aura appeared behind them accompanied by immense pressure, causing everyone to turn toward the source. A giant wolf appeared with glowing red eyes and a huge body, striking panic into Joseph's heart, who screamed that it was a real monster requiring an entire army to face, demanding they flee immediately. But Johann realized then that this world contained real monsters and was not just a world of the Middle Ages, so he smiled confidently and asked the beast if he was the pack leader. Then he apologized sarcastically for killing the monster's followers, noting that wolf fur sells for a high price. He felt the monster viewed him as prey as it growled, preparing to pounce. The monster pounced fiercely towards him, but this changed nothing in the equation for him, as he avoided the monster's bite skillfully, asserting that whatever it was, its skin would sell for a much higher price than the rest. He directed a powerful blow toward the monster's eye, causing it to stagger slightly from the force of the blow, but it steadied itself quickly and looked at him angrily. However, Johann shouted in anger because he scratched the skin by mistake, which meant a decrease in its price on the market. The monster growled in pain and humiliation, then let out a powerful howl. The young man used his hands to plug his ears. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation sweep over him and his features changed, as a vision of a violent clash of swords amidst burning flames flashed before him, and when someone's head is cut off in the dream, he wakes up suddenly, screaming in shock. He sat on the ground panting heavily, filled with confusion and astonishment at what had just happened, wondering about the fate of that terrifying monster, realizing moments after looking around that the monster had disappeared completely from the place. He checked on his companion and the child, finding them in a deep sleep, and breathed a sigh of relief that everyone was safe. He carried his companion and the child on his back, deciding to return quickly before more monsters appeared, admitting to himself that he was completely ignorant of the nature of what happened. As he left the place, he couldn't hide his regret looking at the wolf corpses he left behind, wishing he could take those precious furs with him. But he surrendered to reality, realizing his helplessness in this situation, telling himself he must borrow a cart next time. Upon approaching the village, he noticed the lights were still on, wondering if the villagers were still out searching for the missing child. Here his imagination began to work, thinking that although he saved the child without prior planning, this might be an opportunity to earn extra points with his father, imagining a dreamy scenario where his father expresses admiration for his defeat of the wolf pack and appoints him as his successor. But he quickly mocked himself, banishing that impossible idea, settling for the hope of being appointed to the guard at least, which would ensure he wouldn't worry about food in the future. His train of thought was interrupted suddenly by the bright light of a torch and the sound of suspicious movement, finding himself shocked in front of a group of armed knights, led by Philip, who screamed at him in overwhelming anger, calling him by his full name, and condemning his disappearance and audacity to be absent on the important inspection day. The news fell on him like a thunderbolt, as he suddenly remembered that today was the inspection date, realizing he was in a real predicament, especially when his father described him as an insolent child. He put the companion down and knelt on his knees, stammering while speaking to his father, trying to justify his absence by saying he had unavoidable circumstances. But the father cut him off sharply, ordering him to silence, and raised his massive axe, threatening to smash his insolent head for daring to ignore him. In those moments, Johann was cursing his luck internally, upset at having to hear these insulting words after miraculously escaping death, regretting the loss of the wolf furs, and describing his difficult life. But amidst this despair, an idea flashed in his mind, and he decided he could turn this disaster into an opportunity to his advantage. He decided to resort to absolute flattery, screaming to his father that he didn't miss the inspection on purpose, but was late because he was busy saving people in the forest. Meanwhile, one of the men in the procession recognized his daughter Dale lying on the ground, so he screamed her name, praising God for her safety after a long search, and embraced her with tears streaming from his eyes, expressing his overwhelming happiness at her survival. He seized the opportunity immediately, pointing skillfully to the scene and addressing everyone in a loud voice, explaining that Dale was trapped by a pack of man-eating wolves in the forest, and that he fought to save the child and managed to defeat the wolves. Murmurs of amazement rose among the villagers, while he completed his dramatic speech asserting that although he was unable to attend the inspection, he believes he has done his duty as a son of a noble knight family. He bowed with deep respect, asking his father for forgiveness this time only, promising him to continue doing his utmost to ensure the safety of the territory, then added in a faint voice and a greedy tone, wishing his father would grant him the position of guard captain as well, which provoked the ire of Philip, who muttered angrily. Johann congratulated himself internally on this perfect public relations display, assuring himself that if he were the interviewer, he would hire himself immediately. The father exploded in laughter, asking if this really happened. "Oh dear future guard captain." But he soon turned serious and suspicious, asking about the location of the corpses of those alleged wolves, asserting he didn't expect him to believe without proof. Johann panicked internally, screaming in defense of his honesty, asserting he even faced the great black wolf, but his father interrupted him with a resounding scream filled with anger, ordering him to complete silence. The father flew into a rage, accusing his son of lying, threatening to tear his mouth if he didn't shut up. But Johann didn't back down. Rather, he challenged his father coldly, asking him if he wanted a duel, showing his full readiness to prove his skills. Despite his hatred for his father, he was hesitant to fight him, but the situation left him no choice but confrontation. The father accepted the challenge with a fierce smile, announcing his desire to see the extent of his son's true skill. The father ordered his son to raise his sword, asserting the duel would be with weapons only, which provoked his anger, cursing his father in secret, recalling that no one had taught him how to use a weapon at all. When the order rang out to draw the sword, he was confused looking at his broken sword, realizing the unequal odds. His father cursed him, despising him, and ordered the eldest son to lend his sword to his brother, so Philip agreed nervously. While handing over the sword, Philip whispered to him, advising him to ask for forgiveness now before it was too late as the only way for survival. But he rejected the advice thinking he hadn't erred, asserting that a real man doesn't run away. He asked his brother to step aside and grabbed the sword, hoping to learn something from this duel. The father scoffed, considering this better, while Johann told himself that showing his skills was the only way to wrest his father's acknowledgement of him, and resolved to prove his worth. Suddenly the father felt something strange, as a savage red aura appeared before him surrounding his son. The father pounced quickly with immense force attacking, but Johann's sword was broken easily from the force of the collision, and he received the sword fragments with great difficulty, causing him to bleed and suffer, while his father was unharmed due to wearing armor. The father continued his attack, calling his son a parasite, screaming angrily how he dared to insult him. The villagers realized with horror that the Lord was completely serious in his fight and intended to kill his son truly. During his attack, the father revealed the reason for not teaching the sword to Johann, reasoning that he would remain a useless piece of trash either way, confirming with violent blows that he would never surpass him no matter how he tried. The father screamed insanely, declaring the territory belonged to him alone, and no one, not even the emperor, had the right to take it from him. Johann wondered in amazement if his father had lost his mind due to alcohol. While profuse bleeding hindered his vision, Philip screamed his brother's name in warning, and the father brought down a crushing blow. The son tried to block the attack, but the force of the blow was overwhelming and penetrated his defense, forcing him to admit defeat to himself in that moment. He fell to his knees exhausted, while his father stood over him coldly, ordering him to know his worth and place well, then directed a terrifying threat at him that if he saw him again, he would smash his head without mercy. The father left the place, leaving his son shattered, and this silence was only broken by the voice of one of the villagers calling him Master Johann. Later, the priest Valberg appeared, fuming with anger at Lord Gessen's behavior, describing it as unjust, and despite Johann's warning that someone might hear them, Valberg didn't care, citing his immunity as an envoy from the Vatican. The priest continued his complaining while treating his wounds, asserting that a knight must possess honor, and strongly condemning the father's treatment of his son with such cruelty. Johann tried to calm the situation with a tired smile, saying he was fine and the most important thing was staying alive. But the priest pointed out the absurdity of the situation where the father wore full armor to duel his unarmed son, to which he replied with a sarcastic laugh that his father might have lost his mind from excessive drinking. Johann sat facing his bitter reality, realizing his total helplessness for not having learned sword arts before. The priest tried to console him, explaining that the loss was logical given the Lord's combat experience and the family techniques he inherited. To illustrate the difference in power, the priest mentioned that Sir Brits in the neighboring fiefdom managed to kill 300 infantry soldiers alone, which struck the young man with amazement at the power of knights. He realized then the importance of combat techniques, admitting he became arrogant after defeating the wolf and thought he could defeat his drunk father. Suddenly, the priest asked seriously if he had truly seen a black wolf in the forest. Johann confirmed it, noting that Joseph and Dale had seen it too, surprised by the priest's reaction. Panic appeared on the priest's face as he muttered religious prayers, increasing his confusion. The priest opened an old book to explain that black wolves have been considered taboo since ancient times, where priests call them the harbinger of death. The priest explained that according to stories dating back centuries, the appearance of black wolves brings death and blood. Although Johann claimed not to believe in superstitions, he wondered if the wolf was an omen for his duel with his father, which the priest agreed was a probability. But the priest quickly changed his tone to reassure him, asserting with a smile that those were just old stories with no need to worry. He added that the Lord might help him because he is a kind person who prefers others over himself, which the young man denied in secret, admitting his only motive was money. Meanwhile, near Eitz territory, specifically in the Brits barony, a horrific massacre was taking place where cries for help and pleading rose. The attackers showed no mercy to anyone. Bodies and blood were scattered everywhere, and desolate silence prevailed over the victims' bodies. The attackers wondered sarcastically why the victims tried to flee even though their fate was death anyway. The attackers commented coldly on the cruelty of the scene, where everyone in the fiefdom was killed and bodies burned to obliterate traces. But they didn't care, considering they were just doing their job, to get gold, while flames devoured the fiefdom's buildings behind them. Finally, one mercenary stepped forward to inform his leader Sir Karamov that they finished cleaning, presenting him with the Brits family seal ring as proof of the family's extermination. Karamov grabbed the Brits family seal ring in his hand and crushed it with force, expressing his severe disappointment because Baron Brits only withstood 2 attacks from him, despite the high expectations he built on rumors claiming he killed 300 soldiers alone, describing him as not even deserving to be a doll for amusement. Karamov boasted of his identity as a sword of the Holy Empire, an envoy of the Emperor, and collector of seals, issuing a decree to punish all corrupt nobles according to the Emperor's will. Karamov promised his soldiers and the Emperor's followers gold and infinite honor, ordering them to set out to kill, steal, and burn everything without mercy, clearly defining their next destination towards Eitz territory. Meanwhile, Johann was dreaming of a scene where 2 knights were fighting each other, and one of them in the dream was parrying the other's attacks with total ease. Then the knight with golden armor responds with an attack cutting off the other knight's head. Then he sees in his dream the knight's severed head, and realizes in silent shock that the head he sees is his own head. Johann woke up in his room terrified and sweating, wondering if what he saw was just a dream. The same nightmare had been haunting him for days since seeing the Black Wolf. He remembered the priest's talk explaining that the Black Wolf has been known since ancient times as a bad omen, where priests consider its very existence a bad sign bringing blood and death. He placed his hand on his face, anxiously recalling the priest's description of the wolf as the mark of death. He tried to banish these thoughts with a nervous laugh, convincing himself they were just superstitions and myths as the priest said, assuring himself he did nothing bad to the wolf. But he froze suddenly when he remembered throwing a very large rock at it. He decided to shake these obsessions from his head and go training instead of useless thinking. While Johann was punching a tree trunk in the forest at sunset, a familiar voice interrupted, calling him useless child. His 2 brothers, 2nd and 3rd in rank, appeared mocking him, reminding him of their father's warning not to draw attention if he wanted to stay alive. They continued mocking his audacity to act tough despite being beaten previously, describing him as a dog that barks but doesn't bite, belittling his training of chopping wood. The brothers mocked the idea that a lowlife like him had real power, considering breaking firewood just a cheap trick. When they remembered what he said about joining the guard, they burst out laughing, asserting their father would never appoint trash like him. While he was directing a light punch at the tree, one of them continued threatening that their father would use him only to smash his skull and feed him to pigs. But suddenly, sounds of violent crashing rang out and splinters flew as his punch caused massive destruction to the tree trunk, which struck the brothers with shock and terror, causing their eyes to bulge from their sockets. He turned to them with a terrifying smile and veins popping on his muscular body, asking them to come closer and repeat what they just said. The brothers retreated in extreme fear and fled, screaming they would tell their father everything. He looked after them in despair, describing them as pathetic fools for living without the slightest thought or worry about how to secure their future and livelihood. He made up his mind, deciding to ignore others and return to focusing on his training only. But he suddenly heard another person's voice acknowledging that what his brother said was the exact truth. His brother Philip appeared, confirming clearly that their father intended to appoint him to no position, something Johann expected beforehand, considering not killing him was the most he could hope for. When Philip asked him about his disappointment, he replied realistically that he would find another way to earn a living. Philip surprised him by saying the father actually fears him, explaining that his great strength represents a threat to him. The father wants obedient children, while he insists on living according to his own principles, making the father believe his son will wrest sovereignty from him one day by force as he did with their grandfather, which Johann considered mere nonsense. Philip ordered a servant to bring something, revealing a simple coat and a long sword of unknown origin, in addition to a spare breastplate, indicating he knew his brother's old desire to possess this equipment. Philip confirmed he differs from his father and is not a fool to discard a competent person, making a promise that he would appoint him guard captain once he inherits the rule. Philip advised his brother to continue training and not cause trouble until then, so he replied grumbling that he is never the one starting trouble. Philip left the place, raising his finger in a sign that he objects to his words, leaving Johann alone contemplating the armor, realizing with shock it was the same armor he saw in his nightmares. He wondered in terror if wearing it would lead him to the same death he saw in the dream, but he felt a strange intuition that he was capable of overcoming this fate despite lacking evidence, and decided he would need this equipment to win whatever the price. The scene shifted to the tavern, where some were denying Johann's story, but one insisted on its validity, claiming epically that he killed 50 wolves and left the spoils out of pride, fighting only to save Dale. Everyone agreed on his nobility, comparing him to his father Gessen, whom they described as a drunken pig, and even wished he had cut off his father's head in that duel. Robert's voice interrupted, offering to buy drinks for everyone, and when a masked person asked him for the reason, he justified it as a celebration of Johann saving his daughter. One of the sitters was surprised and asked the stranger about his identity since he was a new face in the region, to which the stranger replied with a scary, sarcastic laugh, commenting on their audacity to insult their ruler openly in front of a stranger. The stranger sat in the tavern wondering in amazement at the audacity of the young man and the villagers who show no fear. The stranger turned with a sly smile toward one of the men, expressing his keen interest in the story he just told, and asked him enthusiastically to tell him more about Johann Eitz, which raised the man's suspicion and fear. Meanwhile, Johann walked alone at night, humming happily, dreaming of his bright future as guard captain once his brother Philip took power. He felt his golden path had finally begun and started reconsidering his evaluation of his brother, considering him someone reliable. Suddenly he spotted someone lying on the ground, thought he was drunk, and decided out of his responsibility as future guard captain not to ignore him. He approached the man with a friendly smile, warning him against sleeping in the open for fear of the cold, and offered help to take him home, but the man didn't answer. Suddenly he noticed something cold shining, placed against his neck, and suddenly a sense of danger overtook him, and he wondered in shock what was happening. In a fleeting moment the man attacked with a dagger, but Johann couldn't see the attack, wondering in panic about the attacker's identity and if he was a hitman sent by his father. He ruled out the idea that his father was behind the attack because he would come to kill him himself, then wondered in terror if his stepmother was the culprit, also ruling out his brother's involvement. He realized he couldn't guess who sent him, so he screamed, asking the attacker what he wanted. He thought it was about money, so he offered the attacker everything he owned in exchange for his release, even though he didn't own a single penny in reality. The attacker replied coldly that he had enough money, increasing his confusion and terror regarding the real motive. The attacker stopped suddenly, addressing him by his full name and declaring he would ask him a question. The attacker threatened to slaughter him immediately if he didn't like the answer. Johann stood stunned by the strangeness of the situation, wondering to himself about the madness of this person threatening his life then asking a question. He tried to compose himself, summoning his past experience in job interviews, deciding to answer perfectly to save his life. The attacker announced the start of the interview with a scary smile, and the young man prepared for the confrontation. The attacker surprised Johann with a strange comment, pointing to his strong physique that didn't resemble his pig father, asking suspiciously if he was truly Gessen's son. He froze from shock and confusion, unable to believe this was the question determining his fate. He cursed his luck, thinking of the appropriate answer, then stammered, saying that sometimes a lion might be born from a pig's lineage. A heavy silence prevailed where the attacker showed no reaction, making him think he answered wrong and would die. Suddenly the attacker exploded in loud hysterical laughter, declaring his intense admiration for the answer, but he refused Johann's request to release him. With a demonic look, the attacker announced to him, saying he was now his property. He stood dumbfounded, not understanding the meaning of his words. It turned out this man was Kigal, the Empire's greatest assassin and poison master of the Nessus Guild. He honed his sword skills through countless assassinations, and because his movements resembled a snake, he was later known as the Poison Viper. Kigal suffered from a difficult problem, having failed to find a successor worthy of inheriting his unique swordsmanship skills. Despite his exhaustive search everywhere, even inside the Assassin Guild itself, he found only worthless insects lacking qualifications to succeed him. He remembered moments watching trainees fall before him, where few showed potential, but they strongly refused to learn assassin skills, preferring honorable death over staining their reputation. Kigal had killed more than 30 heirs of noble knight families who chose death in the name of honor rather than accepting his training. Due to his running out of patience and feeling time was tight in his search for a successor, he decided to visit the Empire's witch asking for help. The witch welcomed the poison viper who grants peaceful death to all, and revealed to him that the student he seeks resides in Eight's castle, a small forgotten rural fiefdom, and is one of the sons of its drunken, lecherous ruler. Kigal mocked the prophecy, describing Eight's castle as a dirty, backward place, underestimating the idea of his successor being there, noting that 1 gold coin is enough to buy half that land. But the witch laughed confidently and offered him his money back if her prophecy lied. Despite his doubt and worry about the witch stealing the coin, he decided to believe her as a last resort. Kigal wanted to believe the witch because he wasted long years searching and had no time left. However, when he stepped on Eight's fiefdom land, doubt possessed him strongly again, wondering if the person worthy of succeeding him truly existed in this miserable place, and decided within himself to kill the boy immediately if he didn't like him. Returning to the present moment, Kigal introduced himself to Johann as the master of the Nessus Guild, declaring strictly he had no more time to waste and that he would become his successor. Then he gave him 2 choices with no third: death at his hands now, or learning his skills in swordsmanship. Johann stood amazed, not comprehending the situation, and asked him stammering about the amount he had to pay to learn these skills. Kigal got angry, explaining he wouldn't accept money, increasing his astonishment as he didn't believe a guild master of this skill would teach him for free. He rejoiced greatly considering this hitting the jackpot, and asked Kigal eagerly why he took so long, calling him master, expressing that he waited for someone like him all his life. Kigal warned his student that his skills were assassin skills, and learning them would brand him with shame and make him a stain in the history of any knight family, exposing him to scorn all his life. But Johann interrupted him with a desperate scream, asserting he didn't care about honor or shame at all, begging him to teach him. Kigal agreed, surprised by this new type of children. Johann seized the opportunity immediately and asked his new master if he would give him an allowance, reminding him of his wealth and his desperate need for money at such an age. Kigal looked at him in amazement, realizing this boy was something else entirely. At Eight's castle, Lord Gessen announced the end of inspection and his intention to go out for a while, bidding farewell to his wife. The eldest son and his stepmother confirmed they would take care of the castle in his absence, but once he left, they exchanged meaningful glances. The wife muttered with malice that the castle would be hers no matter how Philip resisted, while he scoffed in secret, assuring her the next ruler would be none other than Philip VIII. The lord screamed angrily at his eldest son and wife, expressing he was fed up with their constant bickering all day, giving them permission to do whatever they pleased, then set out. Philip asked his father how to act regarding Johann, who hadn't returned yet, but the father screamed loudly, calling his son by his name, scaring him. The father replied with indifference and cruelty, considering the death of that weakling meant nothing to him, ordering them not to waste his time talking about him. Philip apologized to his father, claiming he understood, but once the father left, his features changed completely, and he began wondering with worry and confusion about his brother's whereabouts and what he was doing now. In the forest near the castle, Kigal decided to test Johann's skills. The young man asked to borrow a sword, explaining shyly that he breaks swords a lot, so the master agreed. Kigal was surprised by his talk about breaking swords, describing him as a reckless child he didn't like anything about. When Johann took a fighting stance, Kigal wondered if this boy was really a son of a knight family, deciding to kill him immediately due to his strange stance. The student asked if he was obligated to use sword skills or could fight freely, so Kigal permitted him to fight as he pleased. Johann smiled slyly when he was permitted to use his fists or rocks or anything, because that wouldn't change the result. He attacked suddenly, and used his fist to break his sword easily, from the force of impact with Kigal's sword, and at that moment the master realized the error of his doubts, and while looking at him in shock, finally admitted the boy's immense strength. Kigal was surprised by the air pressure resulting from Johann's punch, realizing that if that punch hit him, his bones and muscles would be shattered, likening the boy's strength to a lion's, not a human's. But he decided to fight seriously, using a snake-like fighting technique, and Johann wondered in amazement at the master's strange and unexpected movements. He tried to block the attack, but the attack changed its path like a snake, hitting him in the face, and he fell to the ground screaming in pain. Kigal said he managed to hit him with the flat side of the sword, but was stunned because the boy didn't lose consciousness despite the force of the blow, describing it as ridiculous. Kigal praised his student, asserting that if he were born 1,000 years ago, he would be a legendary hero. Johann thanked him, but the master added warning of a fatal weakness he had. He declared strictly he would inevitably die if he continued this way, sparking his shock and confusion as he didn't understand the meaning. Kigal warned his student strictly that his inability to control his excessive strength would be the direct cause of his demise, but he denounced this talk, rejecting the idea of being stupid enough to cause his own death, disbelieving this possibility. The master asked him to attack again if he was confident, then offered him a tempting deal to give him gold if he could break the master's sword instead of his own. Upon hearing the word gold, Johan's features changed completely and his eyes shone with greed. His hesitation turned into unparalleled enthusiasm, and he promised his master to fulfill the condition immediately. He dashed at tremendous speed toward the master to attack, and the sound of strong sword clash rang in the place, but the result was disappointing, as his sword shattered again and its fragments flew into his face, making him scream in pain. He remembered bitterly that this situation matched exactly what happened to him during his father's duel. Kigal explained to his student that the problem wasn't the sword, but his uncontrolled strength, emphasizing the necessity of learning to control it or else death would be his fate. Kigal threw a piece of the broken sword blade at him, explaining that breaking things is easy for swordmasters, but the difficulty lies in control. Johan finally understood he needed to learn to curb his strength to avoid death and to achieve his dream of becoming 8's guard captain. The master told him that if he learned to curb his strength, he could do amazing things. In the blink of an eye, Kigal directed a swift blow at Johan. He was stunned when he saw his metal armor slit in half with a single clean blow. What increased his amazement was that the master used only the sword scabbard, not the blade, explaining that power control enables him to cut anything even without a sharp blade. Kigal smiled, saying he couldn't imagine the extent of power his student would reach when mastering this control. The master announced the end of talk and the start of serious training. When Johan asked anxiously if he would die, Kigal confirmed training would be grueling and might actually lead to death, asking if he was ready. He answered with great enthusiasm in the affirmative. The scene shifted to the quiet castle village, where Johan appeared with a swollen face and clear signs of beating from harsh training. He was talking to himself about the difficulty of controlling his strength, noting he finally learned not to break his sword, but yearned to learn real swordsmanship. Suddenly a commotion caught his attention, and he saw a group of strangers he thought were elves because of their appearance. He screamed at the group leader, asking why they were standing there. The group leader ordered him to leave immediately because the area was restricted. Johan replied sharply, resenting a stranger dictating orders to him. The leader laughed arrogantly, identifying himself as belonging to the Emperor's direct mercenaries. He revealed they were the famous Aquitaine Wolves squad. Instead of fear, Johan screamed in amazement and joy, asking about mercenary salaries because he wanted a job like them. One guard asked sarcastically if he really wanted to become a mercenary like them, explaining mockingly that what they earn in one mission compares not to a guard captain's salary. He revealed they get 2 gold coins per mission, which struck him with extreme amazement. The guard warned Johan that his strong physique made him a bigger target, emphasizing that skill is most important in their work, which he agreed with. While he was drowning in his dreams, thinking of changing his career path to get gold he hadn't seen in his life, he wondered seriously if working as a mercenary was better than the guard captain position. Meanwhile, Karamov and his group arrived inside the castle, but suddenly something strange happened. Johan's hand moved involuntarily, attempting to draw his sword, causing him extreme shock and confusion. The fairy accompanying Karamov noticed his movement, screaming angrily, considering his behavior the height of insolence, threatening to cut off his head immediately for daring to try drawing his sword in her master's face. Karamov intervened to calm the fairy, Jin, and asked him calmly about his identity. Johan stammered, sweating, identifying himself as a member of the 8's family. Then, Karamov revealed his identity as an Imperial Guard Knight. Johan was surprised again when he found his hand on his sword hilt unconsciously. A terrifying feeling overtook him he hadn't experienced before, even when facing the Black Wolf or his father. He described this feeling as the killing intent emanating from Karamov being suffocating, like prey standing helpless before an invincible predator. He ordered him to move aside because he was blocking the way. He felt his heart beating wildly from fear and tension. One soldier mocked his obvious fear, and another soldier described him as a coward. Then he warned him in a sarcastic tone to be careful next time, doubting there would be a next time for him. Jin asked her master if it was right to leave him alive, but Karamov replied he didn't want to cause a scene on such a good day. He entered the castle and muttered something mysterious, that their time to move hadn't started yet. Johan wondered in confusion why an Imperial Knight was in such a remote place. Suddenly Philip appeared, rushing to receive the grand guest. He welcomed Karamov, introducing himself as the next lord of the 8's family, and asked him eagerly about the reason for his visit. The stepmother expressed her intense admiration for Karamov, describing him as incredibly handsome, and presented her son John as the true heir to the Lord, ignoring Philip completely. She continued flirting with Karamov, expressing regret over her early marriage, and offered him entry to the inner castle. Karamov didn't reply to her, but she tried to catch his attention again, yet he ignored her completely. Instead, he asked sharply and seriously about Gessen's whereabouts. Philip objected to addressing his father without titles, considering it inappropriate regardless of status. But the stepmother interrupted him again, defending Karamov as the Empire's greatest knight entitled to address anyone as he pleased, and announced as lady of the house she would handle his reception, hinting at Philip not to object. Philip looked with malice at his stepmother, describing her as cunning for trying to seize the opportunity to appoint her son John heir to the castle. But Karamov interrupted them with a resounding scream, ordering them to silence. He chased everyone away, rudely ordering them to bring him alcohol instead of their chatter. Then he announced coldly he would wait inside the castle until Gessen's arrival. In the dark forest, Johann was swinging his sword with immense force, creating great air pressure, and during fighting he remembered the dangerous aura he felt when he met Karamov. Kigal watched him silently for a moment, before screaming at him, suddenly calling him a fool for lack of focus, throwing daggers at him. He blocked the daggers with great difficulty while groaning, having suffered a slight cut on his neck and appearing extremely tense. Kigal scolded his student, saying if the dagger was poisoned he would be dead, asking the reason for his distraction. Johann admitted something worried him about the knights claiming to be the Emperor's personal guard. He saw it illogical for them to close gates and control entry and exit in Eit's fiefdom this way. Kigal replied coldly, asking what he could do about it, whether it was suspicious or not. Kigal explained that Karamov is the Emperor's direct knight, the strongest warrior on the continent, and his armor itself is legendary. Johann asked curiously if Karamov was stronger than his master. Kigal admitted seriously that if forced to face him, he would turn his back and flee without hesitation. Kigal hit his student on the head to silence him, asserting fight results are unknown until fought. Then he scolded him harshly, describing him as a half-smart child worrying about others while unable to even control his own strength or know basic swordsmanship. Johann regained focus and held the sword seriously, announcing readiness to try. The master sighed and signaled him to attack. Johann dashed, attacking powerfully, and the master's voice rang out, asking him to repeat. The attacks continued, with Kigal screaming again every time. He began wondering in confusion why his attacks didn't succeed. He noticed the master used only the sword scabbard, not the blade, yet he couldn't cut it. Kigal explained the secret lies in power flow. He advised his student not to wave the sword blindly, but to transfer power flow and focus it at the sword tip. As Johann waved his sword, he slowly began to grasp the meaning of power control. Kigal noticed the change immediately, as the muffled sound of his student's sword turned sharp. Johann executed a powerful blow different from previous ones. At that moment, he was certain if he combined everything he learned with the right amount of power, he would succeed. Kigal suddenly felt intense fear, describing the situation as dangerous. In a fleeting moment, he found his sword cut without realizing what happened. Johann stood amazed, staring at his master's cut sword in disbelief, then screamed with overwhelming joy, declaring his success in the task and full grasp of the required feeling, considering it very easy. But Kigal downplayed this achievement, considering it just a lucky strike. Johann was surprised by his master's reaction, and when he called him, he replied affirmatively with innocence. Kigal announced quite seriously he wouldn't go easy this time, challenging him to attack again. Johann bared his fangs and showed a terrifying snake-like attack, striking terror into the master. He managed to knock Kigal to the ground. He kept jumping for joy because he succeeded in his attack again. Kigal wondering in confusion what this boy was, having taught him only power control, yet he managed to use the secret sword technique Snake Tongue quite freely. The master was stunned by his student's ability to grasp a technique he saw in a quick glimpse at their first meeting, and even more so, executing it with skill surpassing the master himself. The old assassin's experience told its owner a terrifying truth, that unless a miracle happened, Johann had already become an opponent he couldn't defeat. Kigal muttered in amazement, describing him as a ridiculous child, while he jumped for joy having learned the technique and secured his meal ticket. Suddenly, Kigal announced his teaching was over and he would leave at sunrise. Johann was surprised and asked disapprovingly, noting he only learned sword basics, but the master assured him he already possessed everything he needed. Kigal admitted grudgingly he had become stronger than him in less than a week. Kigal expressed satisfaction as long as his sword skills wouldn't perish and would continue through him, advising him to live his life as he pleased. Then he praised him, saying he worked hard throughout training. Johann thanked him sincerely, asking if his departure was due to being an assassin. Kigal denied that, explaining it was his nature not to stay long in one place. Johann seized the opportunity to ask his master about ominous signs and the black wolf. He told him about his dream seeing his head cut off after seeing the wolf, and how he thought Kigal was the bad omen when attempting to kill him first. Kigal replied if he actually killed him, he would be the omen, explaining bad luck doesn't come in a fixed specific form. Before leaving, Kigal offered final advice to his student. He advised finding a weapon suiting his immense power first, noting his need for Dano steel at least to withstand his strength, sparking his question about this steel. Kigal explained Dano steel is magic-infused metal found only as legendary relics. He added its crafting method is lost and can only be extracted from ancient ruins, making weapons made from it extremely rare with only a few existing worldwide. Johann scoffed at the idea of being unable to afford a Dano steel weapon even if saving all his life, resenting his master recommending a weapon unpurchasable by money anyway. But Kigal explained sharply he didn't mean buying the weapon, but finding a weapon suiting his current situation. He doubted his master's intentions, accusing him of hiding his true motives being an assassin, provoking Kigal's anger who scolded him for linking everything to his profession. Then he pointed to the unusual weapon color for Danos steel. Kigal warned his student strictly saying, if he saw someone wearing Danos armor, even from a distance, just to flee, without looking back. He added another vital tip. If you don't know your limits, you won't live long, which he promised to keep in mind. After Kigal finished his advice, Johann asked him if he would leave now. The master asked him to carve his next words into his bones. He advised not fighting, opponents he couldn't defeat, and fleeing if the situation was dangerous. But if forced to fight, he must use any necessary means and kill without hesitation. Kigal assured him if he followed this rule, he likely wouldn't die. He looked at him seriously and asked him not to die. Johann remembered his master's words after leaving, to flee if the situation was dangerous, and kill if he couldn't avoid fighting and always try to survive. He promised him to remember those words. At Eit's castle, Madame Eitz asked Karamov if the alcohol suited his taste. Karamov threw the cup with disgust, saying it tasted like rotten piss, and ordered it taken away. The stepmother tried to salvage the situation coquettishly, considering breaking the cup a costly act, and asked if he didn't like it. The wife lamented, saying the better alcohol was in Lord Gessen's bedroom. She boldly suggested Karamov, tired from his journey, move to a comfortable bedroom instead of staying in the hall. She assured him the Lord's room was very comfortable and wouldn't disappoint him. She approached him, whispering seductively that they were alone and could spend a wonderful time together, asking if he agreed. But Karamov replied with deadly coldness, ordering her to get out of his face. The wife tried maintaining her composure despite the insult, reminding him of tight time, and asked permission to start receiving him, noting the Lord would return late. Suddenly, Karamov's eye flashed with a terrifying red glint. He muttered boredly that he was tired of this situation. Then he announced his decision to start enjoying himself. Karamov clamped down on Madame Eitz's neck, describing the massacre as that entertainment known as murder. Philip watched the scene in shock, trying not to make any sound, so Karamov wouldn't find him. Outside, Johann reached the village outskirts to be surprised by a horrifying scene. He saw flames devouring the entire village and froze in shock, wondering in amazement why the village was burning.